We've been talking about our topic, Islamophobia, a myth or the truth, and we have our third guest on hold currently. His name is Imran Shah, and he's a spokesperson for the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, who are a grassroots. They are a grassroots civil liberties pressure group that deals with tackling Islamophobia and the Palestinian issue. Assalamu alaikum and peace and blessings upon you, Imran Shah, and welcome to the show.
Alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Nice to have you. So my first question would be, do you endorse the recent definition published by the APPG?
I think I wouldn't 100% endorse it,
Okay.
but I think it's a massive step forward in the sense that we now have a definition. Mainly because you have the idea that Islamophobia is fake is still quite a mainstream idea inside the British media, at least. So the fact that we have a parliamentary definition that touches upon any discrimination of Muslimness, like the appearance or the description or the sounding of essentially Islamic identity, whether that's individual or collective, that in itself is a good way forward, because it enables us not just to tackle hate crime, but it also enables us to tackle the more overt forms of discrimination you have with Prevent and Schedule 7 and other sort of institutional discrimination. Where I do feel it does fall off is, for example, if someone is using theological arguments about the Prophet, peace be upon him, was a paedophile, or Taqiyya is used as for political purposes. These can be justified as genuine theological debate, but they are essentially Islamophobic tropes that are used to create suspicion and fear of Muslims amongst the general population. So I think it's a massive step forward. It doesn't go quite far enough, in my opinion. But again, this is just guidance. It's not law, so it's not like it's going to be there's going to be a legal consequence. This is just a definition supported by a committee in Parliament, as opposed to actual statute law. So passing as law is going to be a massive challenge at this moment, because there are people on the backbench of the Tory party that believe that Islamophobia isn't that big of a problem, remarkably.
Yeah. Touching on the issue of law and having it as a legislation, would you want to see that happening?
Definitely, yeah. There's the law that is current right now is not sufficient to defend Muslims. It's sufficient to defend people against racial attack, but not when it comes to religious attack. The legal threshold for religious incitement is much more higher. So what I mean by that is that you have to have a lot more evidence, and particular types of evidence that you wouldn't need for a racial hate crime than to prosecute a religious hate crime. And so what they're trying to do in that legal reality is trying to make it sort of linked to, well, actually it's just causing the same impacts of racism, what they did to the Jews, what they did to other people, that othering, that demonization is having the same impact on our society. The only difference is that the Muslim now is the marker, not someone's skin color, or whether they're Jews or not, or whether they're a different form of what is not considered within the British paradigm. So in a way, I can see where they're coming from, but we'll have to see. The devil's always in the detail, and that's in how it's in the implementation of those definitions and that law and so on.
Imran, a question. We were talking about before you came on the show that the new definition of Islamophobia, it actually entails other communities that have a perception of being Muslim-like. They're also affected by Islamophobia. So, does MPACUK work with other religious organizations, particularly, let's say, the Sikh community, which are also affected by Islamophobia? We saw a couple of years ago in the U.S. how basically a Sikh Gurdwara was attacked by a right-wing extremist because they thought it was a Muslim. So does MPACUK work with Sikh communities or other religious communities to help advocate for good policies?
We don't know. We focus entirely on trying to organise and criticise the Muslim communities. That's our remit and our pure focus. However, we do have relationships with other Muslim organisations that have that in their remit. So, we get that side of the discussion and that side of those experiences and those stories from their side as well. And it's interesting because what's happened, I think, for a very long time. I've been on places like BBC Asian Network and other places as well. It's like my personal and the experience of us as an organisation is that there is a certain there's a certain realization amongst the Hindu and Sikh communities that actually Islamophobia is our problem. Whilst before the dialogue was like, well, it's not surprising Muslims are being attacked. I don't want to be attacked, so I'm just going to essentially try and distance myself away from this. You know what I mean? They were, in some regards, some voices were actually supporting the prevent and the sort of extremist narrative that we see around here. So I think what's happening with the Sikh and Hindu communities is that there's a sole realization that actually they're part of they're in the same boat as well. And now there's more collaboration, there's more empathy and sympathy towards the Muslim community from our Sikh and Hindu neighbours and brothers and sisters, and saying that actually we need to solve this together. And I think that's the discussion that's led by inside Parliament and more mainstream by other organisations, as well as ourselves, has sort of that massive pushing and that unrelentless sort of pushing of the agenda of our experience of Islamophobia has been really key to this. We have been, as a community, we have been completely unrelenting on this issue, and we needed to be, because if we sold out in any way, if we were too soft on this issue, then it would have been another 5-10 years before it's even recognised in Parliament. So I think that needs to, and I say this as a lesson because when especially with I'm South Asian myself, so especially with South Asians, what we try to do is try to liaise with people in power, MPs and councillors and whatnot, and try to develop a relationship and use that relationship in order to achieve results. And usually, you see it with British politics, the only time that Westminster or people in Westminster tends to listen is when you're shouting and making noise and you're making them feel uncomfortable most of the time. And we don't do those type of politics. And I think we're starting to learn those lessons, and it has taken the heat of Islamophobia, the sheer brunt of Islamophobia for us to learn those lessons. And these are things that we need to carry on doing.
Yeah, and sorry, Imran, could you just give us... So we've had two previous callers on the show, two researchers from the University of Newcastle. They've said that the most affected group of them are the young people. Who do you think are the most? Do you agree with them that the youth are the most affected, of Islamophobia, or is it someone else who's?
I mean, the most effective especially on a physical level, is Muslim women, for sure. Yeah. Especially those who wear headscarf and niqab. So among them, it's usually the youth, because for us, for at least people my age, I'm 32. So I still remember and so does my mum, the reality of racism in the late 80s and early 90s. So we're kind of used to the experience of not being welcome in this country. But with youth growing up, there isn't, because back then, because it was about racism, there was enough coalition amongst everybody to fight this together. The singling of Muslims have meant that there has been, relatively so, less coalitions to actually deal with this problem. And I think and because we have not been organised ourselves, Muslim youth don't really know how to deal with the problem. And when you don't know how to deal with a constant sort of propagating of you are the problem, you can internalise that. So there is a physical element to it, like we've seen with, in Nottingham, the school where that Syrian refugee was mock waterboarded, went viral on social media. You have that physical element where that sort of stuff has been going on for ages, and those kids were being bullied for a very long time, and that normalization of that oppression, there's that experience. But there's also the psychological experience of that, well, no one's giving me a counter narrative to why I am not a problem. So there's going to be a lot of insecurity, and some Muslims, young Muslims, will fundamentally start questioning their faith, because there must be something wrong about my faith if so many people hate me, and I'm not getting any answers elsewhere that's telling me otherwise. So, and I think that's like, we can talk about the physical oppression a lot, but it's the psychological oppression that actually lasts for generations, and that's why we as an organisation make particular impact on that. Emphasis on that. And like, if we don't are able to counter those narratives clearly and equip the youth with the right ideas, the right infrastructure and tools in order to deal with Islamophobia more effectively than we're doing right now, then you're going to deal with a situation where they're going to be passive in this sort of cesspool of Islamophobic narratives that's being more normalized, and they're going to internalize that. And that has very damaging impacts on any community, any minority within a country like the UK.
Yeah, very, very valid points made. My last question to you, Imran, is what are the solutions in place, for what do you think should be done to counter this now?
So the way that the Islamophobia movement has worked, you have a particular Islamophobia industry, mainly in the US, but there's elements of that in the UK, and Tommy Robinson is part of that. And so they are funded by the tune of millions, like hundreds of millions of pounds. So this is literally an industry, and they're organised, and they have grassroots, and and that's the key word, is that they're organised. We're still learning to be organised, so we need to be. First, we need to have the priority of, like, this is actually a massive problem, and it's a generational problem that we need to start teaching our youth to be in the same way that there's a culture of black people understanding the nature of racism and how to deal with that. We need to start teaching our youth in that same way how to deal with Islamophobia. Secondly, is that we need to prioritize the organization of our money and our resources and our conversations in a way that we tackle this problem. And particularly money, because there's still a habit of sending money overseas, and there's lots of problems that we need to solve within our own community, Islamophobia being one of them, that in order for us to essentially do what's meant to be done as Muslims, we're meant to elevate the condition of humanity. And throwing money at the problem, especially political solutions, here and abroad, is not going to resolve that. There needs to be actual organisation on the ground. Thirdly, I alluded it before, like, we need to make sure that we educate the youth how to engage civilly in this society, how to make change in peaceful, democratic ways, while activism is still a possibility in this country, and secondly, give them the systems and the infrastructure, and to be able to have at least some form of infrastructure where we can unite on action. We're always going to divide it on theology, and we're always going to be differing on theological issues, whether it's Milad or something else. It's going to be always there. But with the state of emergency that we're in, we owe it to our youth, if anybody, to ensure that they have the tools necessary to unite with each other on this particular issue.
Yeah.
So, I hope that's clear. But that's what I really do feel that we need in the next sort of 5-10 years. We need that straight away.
Yeah. I think that's some very good points again. I mean, education has been the key. I think the previous two callers have also said about education being one of the key solutions. But nevertheless, Imran Shah, thanks again for coming on Voice of Islam. We wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.